Bueno, hola a todos, bienvenidos a este evento del CAI, del Centro Argentino de Ingenieros. Hoy tenemos como invitado a Mark van Koningsveld. Mark es un experto en puertos y vías navegables, en particular en el uso de nuevas tecnologías y de sustentabilidad en relación a la infraestructura y a los puertos. Mark tiene una larga trayectoria que ustedes van a encontrar en la página del CAI, pero es profesor en la Universidad Técnica de Delft, en TU Delft, y también trabaja en la empresa, una de las empresas principales de dragados de puertos en el mundo, que se llama Van Oord. Ha tenido también dentro de su trayectoria muchos trabajos en diferentes lugares del mundo, y en particular ha dirigido un equipo que recientemente ha presentado un libro sobre el futuro, aspectos que tienen que ver con el futuro de los puertos, de la navegación a nivel global. Ese libro lo pueden ver online, está disponible, es de Open Access, así que tienen acceso a ese libro cuando quieran. Lo que vamos a hacer ahora es pasar a inglés y vamos a arrancar la conversación con Mark para conocer un poco sus ideas, en qué está trabajando y cómo ve el futuro de la infraestructura portuaria y de vías navegables. So Mark, I'm very glad to have you here. We are very glad to have you here. It's a real honor. You are now visiting Argentina with several activities. One of them is to run a seminar that is happening right now here at the Argentina Engineering Center, and this is an activity that you are doing due to a partnership between the University of Buenos Aires and TU Delft. So I would start by asking you, how do you define yourself? Who is Mark, and what have you been doing till today?
Ooh, that's a difficult question. So first of all, thanks for inviting me here and allowing us to do the seminar in your beautiful building. It's been very enjoyable, I must say. So who is Mark van Koningsveld? Well, I'd like to, let's say, at least describe myself professionally as I like to, let's say, invent better ways of doing old things. So that's basically what drives me in many parts of life, and likewise also in the field of ports and waterways. So I like to look at how things are being done now and then see if, say, maybe if I cannot think of a better way to be better prepared for future challenges. So I think that defines me professionally at least.
Right, that's very interesting, and it talks about innovation, right?
Yes.
So if I ask you, what may be some, if you can share with us a couple of examples on issues that you have worked in the past, where you were able to do that, innovate, to change the way perform into better ways.
Yes, I can relate to that. Because I've been quite active in the field of nature-based solutions in the past years. And if you give an example of looking at how things are done now and then thinking of maybe a better way, we did at some point many port projects worldwide, and then we essentially noted that, let's say, there are a lot of restrictions posed through, for example, environmental impact assessment on the activities that are going on while constructing new ports and waterways. And at some point we noticed that there was a lot of money and time went into monitoring the effects of a project and then always trying to minimize the negative effects. And at some point we decided, well, would it not be nice if we could also have an opportunity to maximize positive effect? And that's when we started to, for example, one of the things that I've been working on in the past is to develop a mobile coral breeding facility, which is a containerized, let's say, sort of aquatic facility with which we can breed new corals on locations where we are, for example, working on the port. And then during the several years that we are on a project, at the end of that project, we can leave behind not just a project, but sometimes also, let's say, literally thousands and thousands of new corals. So that's like rethinking an old situation.
Is that the real case? Have you done that?
Yeah, so we've done it. We've done several pilot projects in Australia to test the technology. And then we did an actual project in the Bahamas where we had to reconstruct a port for the Royal Bahama Defense Force, so let's say the Navy of the Bahamas, because they were let's say, bought new ships and needed modifications to their ports. And then while we were there, we were able to work together with local stakeholders to also experiment with this coral breeding technique. And that was actually quite an interesting success, I think.
So this is very interesting. So when you say that, talk about nature-based solutions, and how do you expect it to be in the future? So what do you see maybe the trends in the use of those kinds of nature-based solutions for infrastructure, in particular for waterways and ports?
So that at least one part of the thinking behind that for me was that that if you design your projects to have minimum negative effects, or maybe at best zero effects, then if you have many projects following each other, then the whole system always degrades a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's important that we also need to rethink our design methods and also what we teach in our university, to not only see, let's say, the risks and the problems and try to minimize those, but also look for opportunities and see how we could maximize those, because otherwise, as we continue on the path of economic development, and then we would gradually, let's say, overburden our Earth. And that is definitely not a sustainable situation on the long run. So we have to rethink that. And that's at least one nice example.
What about the business model behind that? Because those are also, if you may say so, in the short term, they may be costs.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to believe that you may be thinking about them like we are investing in them and trying to bet on potential positive outcomes and who knows, incomes in the future through some tangibles or things like that. But how do you value that? How do you get that to be a part of a traditional, more a conservative approach for a business?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So one way could be to try and let's say evaluate this additional value. But I believe more in, let's say, maybe like the philosophy, following the philosophy, and let's say if, for example, banks or large companies want to invest in large infrastructure, that they don't want any solutions anymore that have net minimum effects, but they really sort of are asking for companies to provide, let's say, also positive solutions. So I think in the conditions of funding or in large clients and maybe who want to work on their profile, they might actually incorporate this as their culture and then just demand for projects in this way.
And is that something that, Mark, you see it is actually happening? So do you see the financial sector and also the infrastructure is paying attention to that and willing to go into that direction?
Yeah, I think so. So maybe it's going slower than we would like, but I think if you look at organizations like World Bank or Asian Development Bank, they regularly have meetings and workshops to think about how to incorporate these nature-based solutions. So it's maybe at the beginning, but I think it's a very interesting and promising direction that we probably have to follow as mankind to make sure that our Earth remains resilient also in the future.
And I know, paying attention to your own background, that you did quite a lot regarding data science applied to ports and waterways and these issues as well. So can you share on that? What are the things that you have been doing, and how do you see the value of data science for deep business?
Yeah. That's another interesting indeed example of where you can rethink the current situation. So I think, well, maybe still actually at this moment, but I think certainly if you look back, we come from a period where, let's say, lots of companies are very protective of their data, right? So nobody really wants to share data with others because they think that they might lose a competitive edge or something like that. So what you see is a landscape with many different companies and governments who all have their own part of the data and maybe have, let's say, some tools that they develop that they don't want to share because then that might give them, let's say, a competitive edge. That's what they believe. But at least there, I always thought that it was much more inspirational if you go for much more open source approaches and rather than keep data for yourself, look for ways that you can combine data to come with better solutions. Certainly in ports and waterways fields, and you see that to truly solve a ports and waterways problem, you need data from the river discharge. You need to know what the bed levels are of a river. You need to know what the sediment conditions is. You need to know which cargo needs to go from where to where. You need to know which are the vessels. So no individual agent knows all these things. So unless we share them somehow, we cannot truly find the solutions that actually solve the problem. So this is why I like to be in data science and simulation, but certainly also from the perspective of an open source mindset. So everything we develop at Delft University, so be it our code or be it our book that you mentioned. We always share it for open source for everyone, because we believe, and we don't believe in earning money, let's say, with small things. We want to sort of create a better playing field and then earn our money at a higher level.
Very interesting. So again, as in the previous case, can you give a real example? Is there any particular port, for example, that you see doing that?
Well, so at least one of the things that we are quite active in at Delft University and in my group in Ports and Waterways is our mantra, so if you will, is that we want to analyze how supply chains over water, how they interact with the physical environment. And then part of that is that we need to be able to model and simulate, of course, logistical processes. And then if you look at that, and then the Port of Rotterdam or ports typically have those problems, but also construction companies have those problems. Well, governments could have those problems. So you see many different parties who more or less have the same problem, and then they each develop their own tool. So one thing that we did as a university is we tried to create an open source tool and try to involve people to contribute to it. So we give away our software, we train people to use it. And then by doing that, we get all sorts of new problems that we can analyze with the same problem. So we first invest in this open source mentality, and that opens the door to much more interesting problems. So that's an example of that.
Yeah, very interesting. Let me now take you to another dimension, Mark, if I may say so, which is that you have a very interesting position because you are both a professor at a very prestigious university, but at the same time you have a position in a very competitive large company. How do you do that? What is the way that you that give you a frame to be able to combine the two different activities, the two different jobs, and what may be the if you want to share with us the possibilities for replicating that to, for example, universities in Buenos Aires or in Argentina?
Yeah, so at least for me, let's say one way to bridge this gap between, well, different companies, so you, that is between Van Oord and the TU Delft, but also to other companies, is to really try to focus my innovation on what I call pre-competitive concepts. So if it is, let's say, so innovative and let's say abstract or somewhere that is pre-competitive, then you can typically get companies to work together to develop something, and then you just develop a pre-competitive open tool, and then you leave it up to the companies themselves to take this tool and apply it in their competitive environment. So what I try to do is always create settings where the circumstances are pre-competitive, and I try to keep all competitive thoughts out of the door. And we've done that with a program called EcoShape. That's different companies working together to think of new ways to design nature-based solutions. That's where I was quite active in for a couple of years. And then also for the data and simulation part, we have a minute of that. So we have EcoShape for nature-based solutions, and we have DigiShape for digital solutions. And then we have different government organizations, companies, universities, research institutes who are really working together on pre-competitive topics that are related to digitization. And okay, then there's a big part of problems that maybe I don't touch because they are competitive, but the pool of problems that I can touch that are pre-competitive is so large that I don't even have to worry about that.
Now, if you come down to, for example, how you allocate your time, or what are the kind of relationships you have with the institutions? Because typically, universities tend to be very picky regarding who should be giving lectures, and the relationship with the market and with the private sector, if I may say so. Even though we are trying to somehow change that and to get more linkages between the two, but it is still a challenge in many places. So how do we do that in the Netherlands? What is, may tell us, what is typically the kind of arrangement that the university is fostering? And then on the other hand, what is the way that the companies are willing to do it in terms of, for example, how you allocate your time, or also what should be the priorities, and what is the relationship with the professor who is also part-time a director in a company?
Yeah, so one thing that's for me is very important, that I always keep, let's say, is focus on pre-competitive stuff, because as soon as I sort of deviate from that, every discussion with companies will become very difficult. as long as I am there, I think people will in practice trust me to be mindful if a company presents a problem that we with our students, for example, can investigate. That they can trust that we will treat their information confidential and careful. So this is the way we try to operate to make sure that there's a trusted environment. And then the link with companies is typically through master students or maybe internships. Or for example, now we have a group of 5 Netherlands students who are traveling and doing an assignment in Patagonia. And so that's the way that we try to be open and then find problems that are interesting from an academic perspective, but are also practically relevant from a company perspective. And there are luckily a lot of those problems. So we can always find interesting interfaces between the.
But are there many other TU professors that are at the same time part-time private sector directors or professionals? Is that the case?
We do have that. So actually, we try to really establish a link with practice wherever we can. But there is like a thin line that you should not cross, and that is very much related to this competitive versus pre-competitive nature. So I think the university would really not appreciate it. For example, if I started my own consultancy company, and then if somebody comes to the university, that I give myself an assignment, if you will, all right? That is not ethical. But if I create all sorts of tools that are openly available and available on the repository and share, let's say, software with whoever wants to use it, then that kind of collaboration is actually stimulated. So it is a bit of a thin line. So it should remain real ethical, so that you don't misuse, let's say, the possibilities. But then, as long as you can keep those relationships pure, then I think, well, we at TU Delft, we very much like our knowledge to have an impact in the world, and you cannot do that if you have no interface with the real world, right? So we have to connect to the real world.
Yeah, but still, as a professor, for example, you are requested to publish, and you are requested to lead students into their graduate degrees and so on. So you do have the same responsibilities as any other professor.
Yes.
So it's interesting as a message, because that is a very different model. The model where a traditional institution like a university becomes more porous, it becomes more open to the society. It allows for different kinds of arrangements for their people, their professors, to be able to work at the same time in the private sector and to exchange knowledge and to allocate time in both things at the same time. So let me take you now to another thing, which is the future of ports, waterways. So how do you see ports changing? What if I ask you, what is the future of ports? If you tell us how you believe a sport, will be, let's say, 2050, what may be the differences from the ports that we see today?
Yeah, so it's like a really tantalizing question. Like if anybody really knew that answer, that would be of course we would say the jackpot. But maybe that is also why we called our book not let's say the port of the future, but we call it Navigating the Changing World.
Yeah.
So if I see a port of the future, we see a port that is agile and that can see trends coming at them and is let's say agile enough to change in time. And then what are then trends that you see? So well, clearly the energy transition, that we move away from a fossil-based system, maybe to more renewable energy, that will have impact on all parts of the port and also on the vessels and also all the logistics that are associated with supplying fuels. I think also like the digitalization aspect will become more and more important, and where you see vessels and ports exchanging more and more information to better arrange their planning and their timing. And one topic that I address particularly here is I am very much how do you call it an advocate to be mindful of the impacts of climate change on water transport. And so it is my firm opinion that people around the world are very much underestimating the potential effect of climate change on water transport, and that is mainly because most people are not aware of how important maritime transport actually is. And so if you know that only about 80% of the world cargo is at some point transported over water, and so everything you see from the beamer, from the screen, from the chair, to your laptop, your phone, everything is probably at some point imported or at least moved over water. And then, so that's already one thing to realize. And then an incident like, for example, the blockage of the Suez Canal. So that then suddenly people realize, if a main connection is blocked, that affects everyone in the world, right? But then as soon as that problem is resolved again, then people start thinking of other things. And I think that the impact of climate change, and then particularly drought, so the lack of fresh water, that can sometimes have, like in the Panama Canal at the moment, you can have, let's say, for a period of months and months, can impact, let's say, the capacity of such an important connection. So it's not as acute and dramatic as the blockage of the Suez Canal, but it's much more elongated and sort of choking off, let's say, this a very important artery for world trade. And that's I think, something that we really need to be super careful of and be prepared for, right? So if climate change is starting to, if the droughts of the past few years, that maybe in 10 or 20 years time, that becomes the new normal, well, that means that we cannot keep our water systems the same. We have to redesign them. And if we have to redesign them in 20 years, we have to start now. So that's a thing that occupies my mind.
Yeah, very challenging, and you're probably aware that we have seen a little bit of that in the Paraná waterway in the last few years. So it is also happening here, and it will probably have consequences regarding the governance of the system, because as you know, the whole Plata water basin shared by different countries, and also in terms of how you can increase the efficiency of the waterway, given that we will be facing changes. But coming back to the point of the future of ports, I will get back to the energy part of it. And I know the Port of Rotterdam is doing a lot regarding hydrogen. So how do you see hydrogen in the particular case of Rotterdam and in general in ports?
So that I'm also regularly involved in studies in the Port of Rotterdam related to these new energy forms. And I think with almost similar to the way I view we should prepare for climate change. So there, my recommendation would be to take, let's say, a system view, and then trying to investigate the different elements of the system and sort of find scenarios for the future behavior. I think something exactly similar should be done like that for this energy transition. So if you're trying to be, let's say, for example, a hydrogen exporter, well, then you have to, of course, look at how much you can produce, how your export terminal looks like, to which location you can export, and also how, let's say, at the end of the line, your cost price is going to compare to other export locations who might be maybe nearby or have different aspects. So that again requires a system view where you can sort of see how local design changes, maybe in your own ports, how they cascade through to the end price of the product at the end of the pipeline. And then, when you have that insight, then you can make informed decisions. And so, for example, decisions like, if you produce hydrogen, in what form would you export it? So do you want to export it in a liquefied form, or maybe in an attached form to, let's say, like in an ammonia form, or another composite product? And each of those choices, they will have impact on how you design the supply chain. Because if you want to turn electricity into hydrogen and attach it to some transport medium, well, that costs energy and that costs money. And also at the other end of the line, you may have to have other infrastructure to release the hydrogen again, and that also costs money. And how those entire supply chains, there are literally tens of different options to do that with different media, different locations where you do the transfer, different storage components, etc. So it's a complex system. And personally, I would always first try to understand this large system and then see what are the buttons that you can turn, and only then invest in something, because otherwise, you might invest in something that seems like a good idea, but in the long run, maybe be too expensive, or maybe not be, let's say, competitive to other suppliers. So that's the reaction.
Yeah, well, as you probably are aware, also Argentina has a very rich resource in terms of renewable energy. For example, our wind in Patagonia is extraordinarily, I think, competitive in terms of renewable energy worldwide. And the same happens this time. So it's solar energy. So, and many people are thinking, well, then maybe there's potential for resources in hydrogen and linking the hydrogen to the world markets. And for that regard, you have to solve the way to transport hydrogen. And you will need ports and you will need provide ships. Now, if you come back to what is happening so far, there are not many examples, right? There are only a few cases, including Australia and Japan. So how do you see that evolving? Do you see that in the near future, we will have real examples of crossing the Atlantic with hydrogen? Is that something for the short term, or we are still very far away from
that? And maybe that is also, and maybe that transition could be accelerated if, let's say, the bad impacts of climate change become suddenly much more visible, and maybe that will motivate people to change faster. But if that is not going to happen, then I think it probably the change will happen only from, let's say, business case to business case. So if you look at Port of Rotterdam, they are now investing in several projects to start producing hydrogen, and then you see that they basically close the complete supply chain before they start something. There's, for example, an offshore wind park that brings electricity on shore. Then there's an electrolyzer transforming the material to hydrogen that goes via pipeline to our chemical cluster, and there that hydrogen is used as a sort of energy in that particular factory. So because we can close the loop between supply and demand, you can sort of negotiate a project that can proceed. I think it still takes some time before there's literally like an open market, like you have, for example, for oil and gas, right? There you don't have to worry about exactly who is, let's say, the end user, because if you supply it, there are multiple end users. So there's some time that we need to go to that situation with hydrogen in the background, and whether or not that will be, let's say, in 20 or 30 years time. But I can also not look into the future. The only thing that I typically like to do is that in situations with such uncertainty, that I try to quantify at system level how decisions will play out in terms of cost and particular end of pipeline cost of the product. Because if you have that under control, then you can make the best informed decisions, and then you might still take a wrong decision. But if you try to just move forward with some initiative, then the probability that you are betting on the wrong horse is to my opinion, very large.
And what about the use of hydrogen for vessels? I know in the Netherlands, there are now a few initiatives about it. But do you see that this is going to be one of the fuels for the vessels in terms of large-scale use or not?
I think that's quite an interesting question. So for PIANC, I was part of a task group that looked into, let's say, infrastructure changes for the decarbonization of inland shipping. Yeah. And that's not the same, of course, as free-going shipping, but as an example, it works. So we were analyzing the situation in the Netherlands, connecting the Port of Rotterdam basically to the hinterland. And then there you have an organization sort of analyzes problem for inland shipping. And they were making a roadmap, like a vision, long-term vision for how they see the fuel demand in the future. And one of the things that discovered there is that, well, they have a couple of visions for the future. And actually in any vision, there's, let's say, like a whole bunch of potential fuels that are still being mixed. And I think it's not possible to say, well, all ships will go into hydrogen. I think what you probably will see is that it depends on what the ship is going to be used for. So if a ship has, let's say, short distances, then most probably battery electric will be like a very good solution. But if you have ships that need to go long distances, then with batteries, for example, probably the recharging would take you would have so many stops that maybe another fuel would be more competitive. So again, here, I would also look at the system and then check, okay, which cargo needs to go from where to where, which ships are going to do that, and then per situation figure out, okay, what's then the most likely fuel that you could use, and then work from there.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I know the cases that you are trying in the Netherlands, they are for like a week of autonomy, and they are planning on building a vessel for dredging with only that autonomy, just to use it around and not to do round trips. And then let me bring you then back to this part of the world. So you've been here for a few days. I know you visited the Delta. I hope you liked it. And maybe you can share that. But my question to you is, out of the information you are learning about, and do you already see some opportunities for let's say, improving our waterways and increasing our capacity on port?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I always like this the interaction with Argentina, and also particularly this case of the Paraná River and the recent drought. I realized that it was not a nice situation, of course, because it caused a lot of stress. But what you have here is, let's say, I think a very important economic cluster when it comes to agricultural products that need to be exported outward. And then you have, let's say, like a waterway network that is very much clearly sensitive to climate changes, and so can be prolonged periods of drought. And I think the methods that we have developed and used in the Netherlands can also apply here. So, and then basically we would look at 3 different steps. So first, look at the system the way it is now, and then figure out if I apply different stress scenarios to this system, what are then the things that most likely go wrong? And that could be physical, so lack of water, but that could also be, let's say, certain regulations that are in place. So one case that was mentioned this morning is that LNG vessels that sail up, let's say, the Paraná River, and there are regulations in place that if such a ship sails up the river, that the entire waterway is blocked for other traffic. And that can be a smart a rule, maybe from a safety perspective, but it will also have lots of consequences for the rest of the traffic. So step 1 would be to analyze how the system works and how it responds to rules, man-made rules, and changes in nature. And then I think it should be possible to think of interventions in the system that make this system more robust in case of very little water, or in case of a lot of water, which could, of course, also be a consequence of climate change. And then based on that, you could probably have some rational package of measures that could potentially then be implemented. And that's at least why I am always happy to discuss with the Argentinian engineers on their system, because they have like a very interesting problem that we also like to look at and to think about ways on how to improve it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I know you will be here for a few more days, so I hope you have that opportunity. I believe that there are plenty of opportunities to increase our waterways, even to extend them all the way up river, where there is a lot more production than there used to be only 20 or 30 years ago. And if you see the costs of waterways for moving those loads, of course, it's a lot more competitive. And I think it's possible to be done in a sustainable fashion. So, and also at the same time, what we see is a change in the capacity and sizes of the vessels. So we probably have to think about how to increase the dredging in some of the parts of the system, particularly in the mouth of the watershed, and to according to that to develop new logistic infrastructure for handling. This is to say new ports probably for handling the larger vessels that may be very useful for the next 20 years. But again, all of that has to be thought in a comprehensive approach, I guess, as you are telling us. So just to finish, I'd like to open for any kind of not only questions, but also comments or maybe ideas that you are thinking about, both out of the Argentina, what are you thinking about working on in the future?
Well, like I said, that's the topic that I just discussed in the Argentinian case, on analyzing, let's say, an important water transport network and how it responds to climate change. And so that's a topic that we have been working on, and I would like to keep working on. And actually, that the topic of the energy transition, and then in particular thinking of new transport networks for alternative sources of energy, that is something that intrigues me also a lot. And so I think the coming years will be super dynamic in that front, with large, you see that in Europe with large investments into hydrogen backbones and other sort of infrastructure that is already being put in place, preparing for this new future. So I think that in terms of navigating a changing world, that is something that we need to navigate together.
How did you like the Delta?
It was awesome, but I was also lucky because we were, I think, almost the most beautiful day of the year, with very calm waters and sunny. So I don't know if this is representative for the Delta also all the time, but we were super lucky with the weather, and it was a really enjoyable.
So Mark, thank you so much for this conversation, and we are very happy to have you here. And with this, we're closing. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Right on the Hidrovía, which I know very well. And I have been contacted by people in Paraguay looking forward to 2 days ago, maybe to build a port there. So if something.
Yeah, and I can say that this Sunday, Mark was visiting the Delta. I couldn't be there, but he was very close to the office.
That's fantastic. If you have information, you can send her.
Yeah, we can share that information.
Yes, or I can send to you, because I'm ready to make any project, experimental project there, anything that could be. It's a big piece of land with 2,300 meters on the Hidrovía, very close to Buenos Aires, Paraná, and Canalonda. It's 36 kilometers from Buenos Aires City on the Paraná, on the Hidrovía.
Yeah, so it's of course very hard for me to comment without really fully knowing the location and so on.
Yes, but it's on the Hidrovía. The channel will stretch to 32 feet. The people who are now they have an extended contract. They're in Belgium, I'm sorry, but they look forward to add on, because they want to put the map in my place, sound, whatever. And I think it's a good place to develop a project, or to the university to put a station there, or to some experimental thing, whatever. This is a specialist. And maybe the future labor minister, Ministro de Obras Públicas. Maybe. Maybe.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Future minister.
But so those are the kind of things that, of course, I hope to have so later on Friday. We also.
There's a lot to do here, because he presented a project maybe 3 years ago in CAISA for the whole extended Hidrovía project, and the second Hidrovía, and to fight droughts and to inundaciones.
Floods.
Floods. So it's a lot of work, and it would be great to use my land to make some stations.
Yeah, the land is very well located. It's right along the Paraná Departamento. I think you went to the Paraná.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just across the water on where you were.
Okay. Actually, yeah.
In front of the Paraná Departamento. It's a great location, and she's been thinking about how to use that for useful development somehow. So maybe sustainable approach, maybe research, maybe so.
Oh yeah.
Okay, now let's say you don't need that. But here,
Oh yeah.
you see,
Yeah.
Here we are here, now we are here. Exactly. And I meet it, and here I am.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so it sounds really interesting, but my best recommendation would be for these kind of things to first understand a little bit the larger system, and then think about what kind of use could you what kind of use could a port, or let's say a terminal area at that location be? What kind of cargo do you think you need, and how much space would you need for that cargo? And then come up with a proper plan. So yeah, but
Engineers.
and likewise, so on Friday we go to the Soy terminals above
Yeah,
Rosario.
he will go to Rosario.
Really?
Friday. He will be visiting the terminals, the crashing terminals,
Mhm.
Terminal 6 in Grenoble. And
And,
these are two of the biggest, largest.
and I just sent it to you. Your white Minister of Tourism are looking forward to make a road, a tourism road from Puertos y Vías Navegables up to Rosario.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I sent it to you.
Okay, I didn't open it. I will. Okay.
Yes,
That's it.
half an hour ago.
Yeah. So excellent. So I will be sharing that information with you as well.
Yes, excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Mark.
I hope
If
that,
you have a few minutes, I can show you 2 rooms downstairs.
Yes, I will be happy.
So follow me.